Today, Dispatch Live is talking to Liza Wright of Liza Wright Properties, a company that's been working in East London for the past 20 years. Liza, today we're going to talk about property prices and rates and water.
Okay.
And what's a good investment, a bad investment, and what one does to counter these rates. So we're going to start focusing on the Quigney. And you've been in South Africa for 30 years, and you were saying 30 years ago the Quigney was rated as a highly investable area, and each year the same thing has happened.
Well, we've all been waiting for the Quigney to turn around and become the place to live with the lovely sea views, and it hasn't really ever happened. But it has been a good place for investors to buy, and we have a saying in the industry, slumlords who have bought, buyers from the Transkei, from East London, from everywhere, who buy these properties and multi-tenant them. So they'll put tenants in 3 bedrooms and the dining room and the lounge, and sometimes 2 per room. They make a lot of money from that, and it's a really good return. They can probably start off at about between 15 and 20% return on their investment. But nowadays, with the penalties on the water, it's impossible, because the more tenants that are in the units, the more water they're using, the higher the rates and taxes, which makes it not an investment anymore for the guy who owns the property. So we've seen a lot of those come on the market, and I'm not sure if BCM are going to drop the water charges now that the dams are full, but it has really affected that market.
So talk about the fact that people are probably spending more on their water than they are actually getting on their rates. Is there any truth in that?
Absolutely. So over the last 20 years, I have been involved with a lot of high-end businessmen who have wanted a property portfolio as well as their main business. So I've bought flats in Southernwood, in Quigney, even big buildings which they've converted into rooms and put bathrooms in, which I've got lots of clients who've done that, and now they are not making any money. In the past, maybe the rates on water would be in the region of 2,000-3,000 a month. Their rental income would be high, their mortgages would be low, so they could get a great return. Now their water accounts are anything between 12,000 and 20,000 a month, and it's just not cost effective for those owners to keep those properties anymore. And we have got loads and loads of them on the market, Southernwood, Quigney, and in Amalinda. And of course, when the buyers go and look and they see the rental amount, they say great, and then they want 3 months BCM accounts, and they say no, thank you very much. Yeah, so it's difficult for the sellers to sell them as well.
What happens to people that own those shells now? And that's all they are. Everything has been stripped out of them. A drive through the Quigney and they're a lot. What can they possibly do to get out of it?
I think they've probably made their money over the years, and they're just unwilling to spend any more money on those properties because they just get ramshacked. And we've seen lots of them. Once the house is empty, everything gets stolen. The geysers, the ceiling boards, the toilet fittings, the basins, the kitchens. There are some investors who still rent those rooms out. And I've even been given some to try and sell, which are basically impossible.
So it's impossible to sell them. It's impossible to rent. So you've got now homeless people making use of them. But they're still paying rates on those buildings. So
maybe
is it a never-ending journey?
I don't know what those guys can do. I know that there were blocks of flats in Southernwood where there was one called Skyways. Ownhaven Housing Association eventually bought it and converted it, and it's now Skyways. and all the units were sold. It's very, very well managed. And at the time of them buying it, a lot of the owners had gone, were living in America, were living all over the world. They had just abandoned the flats. I don't know if you remember that block in the Southernwood. It was a tall, tall block. And I think it had 3 developers who all went bankrupt and couldn't finish the block. And it was also being housed vagrants who'd stolen all the geysers, and the original owners probably bought it off plan, and then it was a disaster and they disappeared. So I'm not sure if any of those owners or all those owners were eventually found and paid out 20, 30 years later.
The large property owners have been at BCM's throats for the last, for coming up for 5 years regarding rates increases. There have been court cases. But now it appears that water is the main one. And although the dams are now 75% full, the water prices are not coming down.
No.
Do you have any ideas of how people are countering this?
I've got one homeowner who rents out a multi-united home with granny flats, and the water accounts were between 11 and 15,000 a month. And he eventually did put water meters in, which has helped. All the tenants walked out. He got new tenants, and the tenants have to pay for their own water now. So the water's come down to about 2,000 a month. But up until that time, the tenants didn't listen to the homeowner, even though he had given them all sorts of ideas on how to help with water saving. But they weren't paying for it, so they didn't really care. So he was lucky that he had a home that he multi-tenanted and had that he could put the water meters in. But some of the buildings in Southernwood, you can't put water meters in. So the tenants don't care. They just waste water, and the BCM account goes to the owner of the property. Doesn't matter what he does, they will not listen, and he ends up having to not only pay the rates, but to pay the extortionate water accounts, which are not coming down, it seems.
So as investors, the people that come to you and ask you to purchase a property so that they can rent it out, water is likely to be one of the most serious questions. And if you can't install individual meters or perhaps just block meters, that's not going to be a good investment.
So when we advertise, the buyers get excited because the rental income's high, and they work out what their bond repayments would be, and then they ask for 3 to 6 months BCM accounts before they would make a decision to sign an offer. And when they see that the BCM accounts are between 11, 15, 20, 25,000 a month, then they just back off. So the seller's a bit stuck. He can't really do anything. He can't sell it, and it's not cost effective for him to keep it either.
If we just take a step back into the Quigney, BCM has looked at turning the old railway yard, the shunting yard and that, into a university complex. They also looked at setting up their own offices there. With either of those developments, is it likely that the Quigney can make a comeback?
You know, Ted, we've all been talking about this for 30 years, and it's got such a lovely beach, and it's so pretty, but I think the area's gone so downhill now, and there's still so many slumlords, and the crime is pretty bad that I really wouldn't like to say that it could make a comeback. It might help. I'm not sure if it'll make a comeback in the next 10 years or the next 20 years, but I don't think it's looking good.
So what is looking good if we looked right across to Kids Beach in the west and then up to the Kwaleja Crossways Kafani area? Do you have a preference?
You mean for
as an investment?
As an investment to get a return, look, it's always been a better option to get a cheaper property and a higher return. And some investors only want to buy in Nahoon Mouth, so they might start off with a 3 or 4% return. So it's going to take maybe 10 years to break even. Whereas if you do buy in the areas where you can multi-tenant, you can maybe cover your costs from day one and start making a profit from year 2. So maybe people are moving out of town now because of virtual working, and it's probably cheaper. You can get a cheaper property and rent somewhere for half the price that you can in town. Maybe you pay a bit more for petrol, but as an investment, you pay less rent.
Dispatch Live recently spoke to some investors in Bedford. I don't know if you're familiar with the Bedford township, but there's been a lot of properties bought and sold there, and the whole place is looking amazing. Is that something that people could look at?
I think the crime is a big problem in East London, so people like to move out thinking that it would be a much easier way to live than being surrounded by high walls and alarm systems and beams and burglar bars and continuous noise in the streets, trolleys being pushed at night and layabouts sleeping under trees. So that is quite that's something that everybody's fed up of now, and moving out of town would be a much better option if the crime would be less. So I think that's why people are moving to Quillecha and Kids Beach and Bedford. I know Bedford's always been quite a trendy place to live. I've never actually been there.
The next step as far as East London goes, with people leaving, and apparently the numbers show that people are leaving, are we expecting people to come into East London? East London could in fact be the retirement capital of South Africa. It's got everything. It's better climate than Cape Town, better climate than Durban, and it's quiet.
I've had a great life here. Lovely place to raise kids, lovely schools, nice beaches, but the numbers of people leaving are increasing. So it's mostly the Garden Route, George, Plettenberg Bay, Cape Town and Perth. That's where everyone's going. And I think there are people coming in. The housing market is still busy, but it's not as busy as it used to be. And different markets, different demographics, so different price properties. But yes, I agree, East London could be the most amazing place to live because of the climate, and tourism could really boom here if the tourism industry was organized.
Absolutely. So if we are understanding you correctly, if you're going to buy a property, invest in a property that you can rent out, make sure you can control the water.
Absolutely.
Liza Wright, thank you very much for talking to Dispatch Live.
Thank you for having me.